I still remember the morning when everything inside me changed. Not because something loud happened, not because someone shouted, but because of something so quiet, so simple that only a person who has carried a lifetime of unspoken sacrifices would truly understand. I was standing near the kitchen window, holding a cup of warm tea between my hands. The steam touched my face softly, almost like a reminder of all the mornings I had lived through. Mornings when I woke up before everyone else. Mornings when I cooked, cleaned, planned, worried, hoped, prayed. Mornings when I gave more than I ever kept for myself. But that morning felt different. Because when my husband walked into the kitchen, he didn't look at me the way he used to. He didn't smile. He didn't say good morning. He didn't even notice that I had already made his breakfast, just the way he liked it, the way I had been making it for more than 20 years. He just walked past me and picked up his phone, and for a moment, I felt invisible in my own home. I wanted to tell myself that it was nothing, that he was tired, that he was busy, that life had changed, not him. But a quiet voice inside me whispered something I didn't want to hear. He does not see your sacrifices anymore. I didn't react. I didn't ask him why he didn't speak to me. I didn't remind him of all the love I had poured into this house. I only took a slow breath, looked down at my hands, and whispered inside my heart, "When did I become a shadow in my own marriage?" That was the moment everything truly began. The house was still waking up. The soft sunlight was slipping through the curtains. The sound of a distant bird outside felt almost like a memory of happier days. I kept standing by the window, not moving, not speaking, just feeling something heavy in my chest. My husband sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, and I stood there quietly watching the side of his face. This was the same man I had once dreamed of spending my whole life with, the same man for whom I had left my own family, for whom I had shaped my days, my nights, my youth, my identity. But now, watching him sit there without even acknowledging my presence, I felt like I was looking at a stranger. Or maybe he was looking at me as if I was the stranger. A part of me wanted to walk toward him and say, "Do you remember? Do you remember everything I did? Do you remember the nights I stayed awake taking care of the children? Do you remember how I supported you when you lost your job? Do you remember the dreams I buried so your dreams could survive?" But of course, I didn't say any of that. I simply placed his cup of tea in front of him, quietly, gently, like I always did. He didn't look up. Just a simple thanks would have been enough. A small smile, a gentle nod, something that said he still valued me. But there was nothing. Only silence. And silence, when it comes from someone you love, hurts more than any harsh word. As I walked back to the counter, I felt a calm ache in my heart. It wasn't sharp. It wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of pain that comes from years of giving, years of choosing someone else before yourself, years of loving without keeping score. Maybe that was why it hurt so deeply, because I had never asked for anything in return. Not gifts, not praise, not appreciation. All I ever wanted was to be seen, just to be seen, just to be remembered. I took a sip from my own cup, letting the warmth settle inside me, and for the first time, I allowed myself to remember everything I had done for this family. The late nights with sick children, the early mornings preparing for school, the times I waited for him when he was at work, never complaining, never asking why he came home late. The meals I cooked even when I was exhausted. The way I kept everyone's world running, even when mine felt like it was falling apart. I never counted my sacrifices. But life remembered. My heart remembered. And that morning, when my husband ignored me so effortlessly, all those memories rose inside me. Not with anger, not with bitterness, but with a deep, quiet sadness. A sadness that felt like truth. Still, I tried to hold myself together. I moved through the kitchen, washing dishes that weren't dirty, wiping counters that were already clean, straightening things that didn't need straightening. I just needed something to keep my hands busy, because if I stopped, I knew I would start thinking. And if I started thinking, I might start crying. My husband finally stood up, grabbed his keys, and walked toward the door. I expected him to say something before leaving, a small goodbye, a gentle word, a reminder that he still cared. But he only said, "I'll be late tonight," without even looking at me. My heart sank. Not because he said he would be late, but because he said it like a man talking to someone who didn't matter. He closed the door behind him, and the house became silent again. Strangely, I didn't cry. The tears stayed somewhere deep inside. Maybe they were tired too. Maybe they had cried enough over the years. Instead, I walked back to the kitchen table and sat on the chair he had just left. The chair still felt warm from him, but the warmth didn't comfort me. It reminded me of all the warmth that had faded between us. I placed my hands on the table, staring at the cup of tea he didn't touch. And in that moment, I whispered something so softly that only the walls of the kitchen could hear. When did I stop being important to him? The question hung in the air like a quiet echo. I didn't have the answer, but I knew this was not the first time he had forgotten my worth. It was just the first time I allowed myself to feel it. And maybe the first time I allowed myself to admit it. As the morning continued, I walked through the house, touching things that held memories. The family photos on the wall, the dining table where we shared countless meals, the couch where we sat together when our children were small, the bedroom where we once whispered dreams to each other. Every corner of the house carried a piece of me, a piece of my effort, a piece of my love. And yet, I felt like nothing in this house carried his love for me anymore. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, looking at the bed we shared. The blankets were still messy from last night. When was the last time he held my hand before falling asleep? When was the last time he asked if I was all right? When was the last time he noticed my silence? I tried to remember, but the memories were too old, too faded, too far away. A deep breath escaped my lips. I wasn't angry at him. I wasn't blaming him. I wasn't trying to become a victim. I was simply facing a truth I had ignored for too long. He had forgotten the sacrifices I made, and I had forgotten to value myself. This realization settled inside me like a slow sunrise, quiet but undeniable. I walked back to the living room and sat on the couch. The house felt too quiet, too still, almost as if it was waiting for me to finally acknowledge the pain I had been carrying for years. And I did. I closed my eyes and let myself remember everything. The first year of our marriage, when money was tight and I managed everything with so much care. The time he fell sick and I stayed awake for 3 nights, making sure he had everything he needed. The years I stopped buying things for myself so the children could have better clothes, better shoes, better chances. The festivals I spent cooking from morning till night. The celebrations I planned. The tears I hid. The dreams I postponed. The comfort I gave him even when I needed comfort myself. All of it. Every moment. Every silent sacrifice. A small, trembling smile touched my lips. How beautiful it was that I loved so deeply. How beautiful and how lonely. But I didn't blame him. People forget the things they get too easily. People forget the hands that build their comfort. People forget the hearts that make their world warm. And sometimes people forget not because they are cruel, but because they have become too comfortable. My husband didn't stop loving me. He just stopped noticing me. And that, in its own quiet way, hurt even more. I opened my eyes slowly and looked around the empty room. This was my life, my home, my story. A story of love, a story of sacrifice, a story of a woman who gave and gave and gave. And now, a story of a woman who finally realized that she had been forgotten by the person she loved the most. But this was only the beginning of a journey I didn't know I needed, a journey of truth, a journey of remembering myself. The day continued slowly, almost painfully slowly, the way time moves when the heart is heavy. I tried to keep myself busy, watering the plants, folding laundry, organizing cupboards I had already organized 100 times before. But everything felt different now. Or maybe I had finally begun to see things as they really were. As I folded a shirt of his, neatly and carefully like I always did, I paused. I looked at the fabric between my hands and felt a strange ache, as if I were holding not just a piece of clothing, but a memory of who I used to be. I used to feel proud doing these small things for him. I used to feel loved when he wore the clothes I washed and ironed. I used to feel seen when he said, "You take care of everything so well." But now, there was nothing. No words, no appreciation, not even a passing glance. Just silence. And silence can become a wall. One you do not notice at first, but slowly, brick by brick, it grows taller between two people who once shared everything. As the hours passed, I began to notice all the little things that I had ignored for months. The way he no longer asked me how my day was, the way he stopped sharing details of his life, the way he scrolled through his phone during dinner, the way I had become someone who existed quietly in the background. A familiar pain formed in my chest, like an old wound being touched again. I walked into our bedroom and opened the drawer where I kept my old letters. Letters my husband wrote to me when I was first married. I sat on the edge of the bed and unfolded one of them. The paper was fragile, soft from being opened and closed many times. His handwriting was young and full of hope. "I promise to always take care of you. I will never let you feel alone. You are the most important person in my life. Each line felt like a whisper from a past that no longer existed. Tears gathered in my eyes, but they didn't fall. I was tired of crying without being seen. I folded the letter again, slowly, gently, as if I were folding a piece of my own heart. I placed it back in the drawer. Then I stood up. I didn't know what I wanted, but I knew what I couldn't do anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. Around noon, I made lunch as usual. A simple meal, something he liked, something I had cooked hundreds of times. I placed the food on the table, even though he wasn't home yet. As I worked in the kitchen, the clock ticked softly. The sound felt louder than usual, almost like a reminder that time was passing, and I was wasting too much of it, waiting for someone who no longer waited for me. Just as I finished setting the table, my phone buzzed. A message from my husband. It was not a loving message. It was not a check-in. It was not a, "How are you?" It was simply, "Don't wait for me. I'll eat outside." I stared at the screen for a long moment. I didn't get angry. I didn't even feel surprised. Instead, there was a quiet emptiness, the kind that comes when you finally realize something you've been trying to avoid. I walked to the dining table and looked at the food, perfectly arranged, still warm. I reached for a plate, then stopped midair. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like eating. I sat down in the chair and looked at the food I had made with care. Food he would not eat. Food that suddenly felt like a symbol of all the love that had gone unnoticed. A small whisper escaped my lips. Why am I the only one trying? The question had no answer. The afternoon sunlight softened as the hours went by. I sat alone in the living room, listening to the faint sound of traffic outside. The world continued its busy rhythm, while inside my home, time seemed still. I reached for the photo album on the shelf. It was old, the corners slightly worn. I opened it and began flipping through the pages. Our wedding day, our first small apartment, our first child's newborn picture. Birthdays, trips, shared smiles, shared life. With each picture, a memory returned, memories filled with warmth, laughter, and dreams. I touched one picture gently with my fingertips. It was of us standing in front of our first home. His arm was around my shoulders. I was smiling up at him. His eyes were full of love. Where did that love go? Did it fade slowly like the colors in these photographs? Did it disappear suddenly, like a light switched off? Or was it still there, hidden beneath layers of routine and forgetfulness? I closed the album softly. I didn't know the answer, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending that everything was the same. As the sky outside grew darker, I stood up and went to the kitchen to make tea again. It had become my way of grounding myself, a small moment of warmth in an otherwise lonely day. The kettle whistled softly. I poured the tea into my favorite cup. I sat by the window, the same place I had stood that morning. But this time, the loneliness felt heavier. I watched children playing outside, their laughter echoing through the street. I watched neighbors walking by. I watched the world move with energy I no longer felt. My thoughts drifted back to my husband, how he had changed, or maybe how we both had changed. Marriage is strange like that. It begins with so much fire, so much passion, so much certainty. But as years pass, it becomes a series of choices. Choices to stay close, choices to communicate, choices to care, choices to remember. Maybe he had stopped choosing me. Maybe he didn't realize he had stopped. Maybe I had allowed it for too long. The truth was gentle but sharp. You taught him that your silence meant you were okay. I didn't know if that thought comforted me or hurt me. Maybe both. That evening, he finally came home. His footsteps were familiar, but they didn't bring comfort anymore. The front door opened. He walked in, tired, distracted, carrying the scent of the outside world. I looked at him from the kitchen. He didn't look back. He placed his keys on the table and loosened his tie. I waited for him to say something, anything, just a simple acknowledgement. But instead, he walked straight to the living room and turned on the television. The sound filled the silence between us, a silence that had been growing for months. I walked to the doorway and stood there quietly. I didn't say a word. I didn't move closer. I just watched him. And for the first time, I saw him clearly, not as the man I loved, but as a man who had grown comfortable with forgetting me. He didn't listen for my footsteps. He didn't look to see if I was okay. He didn't ask if I had eaten. He simply continued watching television, unaware that my heart was slowly breaking in the same room. Later that night, I tried to speak. I walked into the living room, sat on the other end of the couch, and said softly, "How was your day?" He didn't turn to look at me. He only shrugged. It was fine. Then he continued staring at the screen. I waited, hoping he would ask about my day too. But he never did. I felt something tighten inside me. A quiet ache. A small betrayal. Does a marriage break loudly? Or does it break quietly, moment by moment, in these small, forgotten exchanges? I didn't know. But that night, as I sat next to him in silence, I felt the cracks growing deeper. Before going to bed, I placed a blanket over him because he had fallen asleep on the couch. His face looked peaceful, relaxed. For a moment, I saw the young man I had once loved so deeply. My heart softened, and then it hurt again, because I realized that I had protected him for so long that he no longer felt the need to protect me. I turned off the lights and walked slowly toward the bedroom. The house was quiet. My footsteps felt heavier with each step. When I reached the bedroom, I closed the door behind me, gently, not in anger, not in frustration, but in acceptance. Acceptance that something was wrong. Acceptance that something had been wrong for a long time. Acceptance that I could no longer ignore the truth. I lay down on my side of the bed, staring at the empty space next to me. Sleep did not come easily. Thoughts kept moving through my mind, soft but persistent. When did he forget my sacrifices? When did I stop being loved? When did I start disappearing? I didn't cry, but my heart did. Silently, deeply, completely. The next morning, when sunlight entered the room, something inside me had changed. I didn't know what it was yet, but I knew this. The woman I was yesterday, the woman who stayed silent, who accepted being forgotten, who buried her own feelings, she was fading. And someone new, someone braver, someone more aware was beginning to rise inside me. But I didn't know then that things were about to get even harder. I didn't know there was a moment coming, a moment that would break me in a way I could never forget, a moment that would change everything. But that moment belongs to the next part of this story, shifts everything. It happened on a Thursday evening. I remember because it was raining softly outside, but kind of rain that makes the world feel smaller and quieter, almost like it was holding its breath with me. I was sitting in the living room, finishing a small cup of tea I had made for myself, when I heard the front door open. His steps were louder than usual, hurried, almost restless. I looked up from my cup and saw him standing in the doorway. He wasn't carrying a bag of groceries or a newspaper. His phone was in his hand, and he looked different, more distant than ever. I tried to smile, tried to greet him, tried to bridge the growing gap between us with a small, "Welcome home." He didn't notice. He didn't say anything. He just dropped his phone on the table and walked past me. And then I heard it. His voice, calm but cutting through the quiet house like a knife. "I don't need you interfering in my life anymore." The words were simple, unadorned. And yet, they broke me in a way that nothing else had. I froze, my hands gripping my cup so tightly that the porcelain felt like it might crack. "Interfering?" I whispered, almost to myself. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched him as he walked past the living room, through the hallway, toward the bedroom. For a moment, I thought I must have misheard. Perhaps the stress of the day had made his words sound harsher than they were. Perhaps he didn't mean them, but the coldness in his tone told me otherwise. I followed him silently. Every step I took was weighted with the memories of years we had spent together, years of sacrifice, of care, of love quietly given. When I reached the bedroom, I found him sitting on the edge of the bed, looking down at his hands. I sat on the other side, careful not to touch him, careful not to provoke him. "What do you mean?" I asked softly. His eyes met mine, briefly, then dropped again. "I mean, you're always in my way. You're always correcting me, always reminding me, always telling me what to do. I can't breathe in this house anymore." I wanted to speak, but no words came. Instead, I felt something inside of me shatter, quietly. All the mornings I had woken up before him, all the nights I had stayed awake worrying about him, all the meals I had cooked, the bills I had managed, the sacrifices I had silently endured, it felt like none of it mattered. And the worst part was, I realized he had been thinking this for a long time, not just in a moment of anger, not just on a bad day. He had been carrying this thought, this frustration, while I carried everything else. "You don't understand," I whispered finally, my voice trembling. "I never wanted to control you. I never wanted to interfere. I only wanted to care, to protect, to love. Every day, every year, I've only ever tried to make life easier for you, for us, for our family." He didn't answer. He looked away. He leaned back, his expression blank, almost tired. "I can't do this anymore," he said finally. "I can't live in a house where I feel smothered, where everything I do is wrong, where even small things are always criticized." And then, like a hammer striking, he added words I will never forget. Maybe we should take some time apart." Time apart. The words were cold, calculated. They were not spoken in anger, but in quiet certainty. I sat there, staring at him. The room was full of memories. The walls had witnessed our laughter, our whispered dreams, our celebrations. The bed had held our nights of joy, our nights of sorrow, our nights of hope. And now, in that same room, he was telling me I no longer belonged. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to throw my arms around him and beg him to stay. But all I could do was whisper, "After everything I have done, after everything I have given, you want to leave?" He nodded, not angrily, not violently, just nodded. It was the nod of someone who had made up their mind. The nod of someone who no longer remembered the sacrifices of another human being. The nod of someone who no longer recognized the love that had built their home. My world tilted. I felt dizzy, as if the floor beneath me had given way. I wanted to understand. I wanted to fix it. I wanted to plead with him to see me, really see me, for the first time in years. But the words wouldn't come. They had been buried under decades of quiet giving, buried under mornings and nights of unacknowledged love, buried under the weight of being invisible. I walked toward him slowly. I reached out my hand, but he didn't take it. "Please," I whispered, "just talk to me. Just tell me why you forgot me." He looked at me finally, and in his eyes, I saw something that hurt more than anything he could say. He had already forgotten me. Not completely, not in every memory, but enough. Enough to turn away from the person who had given him everything. I felt my chest tighten. The tears I had held in for so long began to well up. And yet, I didn't cry. Not yet. He stood up and walked past me toward the door. I didn't try to stop him. I didn't say anything. He opened the door. He paused. And without looking back, he said softly, "I need space. I need to breathe. I need to remember who I am." And then he left. The door closed behind him. I was alone, completely alone. I sank to the floor. I leaned against the wall. The rain outside tapped gently against the windows, like a soft, sad drum. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of everything. All the sacrifices I had made, all the nights I had stayed awake, all the words I had swallowed, all the love I had given. It was all there, waiting for recognition. And there was none. I whispered to the empty room, "You forgot me. You forgot everything I ever did for us." And maybe I forgot myself, too. The tears fell then, slowly, quietly, like rain leaking through a cracked window. I didn't care that they fell on the floor. I didn't care that no one would see them. I didn't care that the world moved on outside, while my heart broke inside. Because in that moment, I understood something. Sometimes people forget the ones who love them most. Sometimes they forget the sacrifices, the care, the quiet devotion. And sometimes they forget the person entirely. The night stretched long. I sat on the floor, holding my knees to my chest, watching the rain streak the windows. I thought of the children asleep in their rooms, of the life we had built together, of the laughter that had once filled these walls. And I realized nothing would ever feel the same. I had reached the turning point of my life. The moment when the story I had been living, of giving, of caring, of being forgotten, changed forever. I didn't know yet what would happen next. I didn't know if we would ever speak again. I didn't know if he would come back. I didn't know if I could forgive him. All I knew was that the person I had been was gone, and the person I was becoming was someone who would no longer be silent. I stayed. I listened to the rain on the floor until the early hours of the morning. I listened to my heartbeat. I listened to the quiet echo of a life that had been taken for granted. And in that silence, I made a promise. A promise to myself. A promise to remember my worth. A promise to no longer allow anyone, even the person I loved most, to make me invisible. And somewhere deep inside, I felt the faintest flicker of hope. If he could forget me, it meant I had the power to remember myself. The days after that night were quiet, almost painfully quiet. He didn't return immediately. The house, once full of shared routines, felt hollow. Even the walls seemed to hold their breath, waiting for him, waiting for me, waiting for something to happen that would never be the same. I moved through the house in a slow, deliberate way. Every step felt heavy. Every glance at our photographs, our mementos, our old letters reminded me of the love that had been real once, and yet now seemed almost foreign. I spent a lot of time sitting by the window. Rain or sunshine, it didn't matter. I watched the world outside. People walking their dogs, children playing, neighbors chatting. Everything continued. Everything moved forward. And yet, inside me, time had slowed. I felt caught between what was and what could never be again. I began to talk to myself in quiet whispers, almost like prayers. I gave my life to this family. I loved him. I loved them. I did everything I could. And now I am left wondering if it was enough. Was it ever enough? I would often place my hands on my heart and feel the slow rhythm of life inside me. It reminded me that even if someone else forgot my value, I could not. Even if someone else turned away, I had to remember who I was. Slowly, I started doing small things for myself. I opened a book I had long forgotten. I brewed tea just for me, sitting in my favorite corner. I stepped outside, letting the sunlight touch my face, feeling its warmth. These small moments felt foreign at first. They felt almost selfish. But gradually I realized they were not. They were the first threads of a new tapestry, a life that included me, not just everyone else. One afternoon, my husband returned. The sound of the door opening startled me, though I had been expecting it. He stepped inside quietly, a little awkwardly, his eyes avoiding mine. I "I came to talk," he said softly. I looked at him. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I just waited. He sighed and sat down across from me. The air was heavy with all the unspoken words of the past few days. I I didn't realize, he began, his voice low. I didn't realize how much I hurt you, how much I took for granted. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to feel the relief that comes with hearing an apology. But I had learned something important over the last few days. Words alone were not enough. I stayed silent. I I forgot everything you did for me, for us. I was blind, he continued. I see it now, and I am so sorry. His words reached me, but only partially, because seeing the pain in his eyes didn't erase the weeks, months, or years of feeling invisible. It didn't erase the ache of realizing I had been taken for granted. It didn't erase the nights I had spent crying quietly in the dark. We talked that evening, slowly, carefully, not arguing, not blaming, not yelling, just speaking the truth. I told him about how I had felt, how invisible, unappreciated, and forgotten I had been. I told him about the sacrifices I had made silently, the love I had poured into the family, the dreams I had postponed. He listened, really listened. And for the first time in a long while, I felt seen. "I never wanted you to feel this way," he said softly, tears glistening in his eyes. "I thought I was protecting you, guiding you, but I see now I was blind. I see now I was wrong. I didn't interrupt. I didn't rush to forgive. I just let him speak, because healing begins with being heard. And for the first time in a long time, my heart felt lighter simply because someone was finally listening." Over the next few weeks, we began to rebuild. Slowly, gently. It wasn't easy. Old patterns die hard. The silence had created walls between us, walls that could not be removed overnight. But we started small, simple gestures, acknowledging each other, sharing a cup of tea in the morning, walking together in the evening. Each step felt fragile, but it was a step forward. Each moment of connection was a thread weaving us back together. Not perfectly, not instantly, but steadily. I began to notice small things in myself, too. I allowed myself to rest. I allowed myself to be seen. I allowed myself to speak. And slowly, the woman who had felt invisible for so long began to reappear. One quiet evening, as the sun set softly over the neighborhood, he took my hand. "I don't want to forget you again," he said, his voice trembling. "I don't want to take your love for granted. I promise to see you, truly see you." I looked into his eyes, and I realized something profound. It wasn't about erasing the past. It wasn't about pretending nothing had happened. It was about moving forward with understanding, awareness, and care. I squeezed his hand gently. "I just want us to be honest with each other," I said softly. "I want us to remember each other and ourselves." And in that simple exchange, I felt something heal inside me. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough to know that we could try again. I also realized that the journey wasn't just about him remembering me. It was about me remembering myself. I had spent years caring for everyone else, often forgetting my own heart, my own needs, my own worth. That needed to change. I began small, a walk in the morning, a book in the afternoon, a quiet tea in the evening. I allowed myself to feel. I allowed myself to grieve. I allowed myself to hope. And in doing so, I discovered something extraordinary. Love is not just about giving. Love is also about being seen. Love is also about being remembered. And sometimes, love begins with remembering yourself. There were difficult days ahead, days when old habits tried to return, days when frustration crept in, days when I wondered if things would ever be the same. But each time, I remembered the turning point, the night he walked away, the silence, the rain, the ache in my chest. And I promised myself, I would never again allow someone to make me feel invisible. Slowly, our home began to feel alive again. Not perfect, not without struggle, but alive. I realized that healing is not instantaneous. It is not a sudden change. It is slow, patient, quiet, and it begins with seeing yourself, even when others do not. And so, life went on. We learned to speak, to acknowledge, to care, to notice. Not everything returned to the way it once was, but something deeper grew: respect, understanding, and quiet gratitude. I began to find joy in the small moments again: the smell of morning tea, the sound of rain on the roof, the laughter of children, the warmth of a hand held in silence. I understood that love is fragile, but it is also resilient. It can be forgotten, ignored, taken for granted. But if we are brave enough to remember, to speak, and to heal, it can be rebuilt. Months passed after that turning point. The house slowly regained its warmth. The silence that had felt so heavy began to soften, replaced by quiet conversations, shared laughter, and moments of connection that felt more intentional than ever. I learned something essential through all of it: that love is not only about giving, but also about being seen, and that sometimes the person you must see first is yourself. I found myself standing by the kitchen window one morning, watching sunlight spill over the street, the same place where I had once felt invisible, where my heart ached quietly as he walked past me, unaware. Now I saw him in a different light, not as someone who had forgotten me, not as someone who caused me pain, but as someone who, like me, had to learn to see and to remember. We rebuilt slowly, carefully. Each day became a small act of remembrance, noticing the little things, appreciating efforts, speaking with honesty, listening with care. And in these small, quiet steps, I realized that love is not always loud. Sometimes it is whispered. Sometimes it is felt in a glance, a gentle touch, a shared cup of tea. I also discovered a profound truth about myself. I had spent years measuring my worth through the eyes of others. I had defined my life by how much I gave, how much I sacrificed, how much I cared. And when he forgot me, I believed I had lost everything. But in that loss, I found myself. I remembered my own heart, my own voice, my own strength. I learned that no one can take your worth from you unless you let them. And I understood that caring for others is beautiful, but only when you never forget to care for yourself as well. Sometimes life teaches hard lessons in quiet ways. Sometimes it is the silence, the absence, the forgotten moments that speak the loudest. And sometimes it is in those moments that we learn who we truly are. Now, when I look back at that day, when my husband forgot every sacrifice I had ever made, I do not feel only pain. I feel clarity. I feel growth. I feel love that is wiser, gentler, more grounded. I forgive him, not because forgetting is excusable, but because forgiveness frees the heart. I honor myself, not because I am perfect, but because I have endured, I have loved, and I have remembered who I am. And when I share this story, it is not to dwell on hurt. It is to remind anyone listening that your worth is never diminished by someone else's blindness. Your heart is precious. Your sacrifices matter. Your life, your feelings, your presence are meaningful, even when the people we love forget. So I stand, quietly, in my own light now, not waiting for recognition, not relying on others to validate my love, but living fully, aware, compassionate, and strong. Life goes on. People may forget. Mistakes may be made. Hearts may ache. But there is always hope. There is always the chance to be seen again. And there is always the chance to remember yourself first. This is the lesson I carry with me now. Love deeply. Give generously. Sacrifice when it matters. But never forget your own worth. Because even if the world forgets, you must never forget yourself.